The Eagles are off to a very poor start. They sit on the year at 1-3 and welcome in the Saints this Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field. And the offensive line has been an absolute mess, as expectations were very high for the Eagles going into the year. So now joining us on the hotline is a former Philadelphia Eagle, played with the Birds from 2000 until 2008. Now a talk show host on the morning show with Sports Radio 94 WIP, and also spent a few years in Congress, and that's the very talented Jon Runyan. Jon, Zach Gelb here on Temple's campus. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great, and we appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. I think your career was so interesting, and I always like to track what NFL players do after they retire from the National Football League. You elected to take a few years in Congress. What sparked your interest in politics?
Just kind of how I was when I was around. It was, just taking the time out to try to give back, try to serve the community, and thought that was probably the biggest picture way to do it. And you learn how difficult that it actually is to get anything done, because there's not a lot of people down there that actually want to do anything but get reelected.
What was tougher, playing in the National Football League or working in Congress?
I say working in Congress because of the fact when you're playing in the National Football League, you know who the enemy is. They're wearing the other colored jersey. Down in Washington, it's coming from all angles.
Well, Jon, I'll be realistic with you and a bit honest. The Republican candidates aren't so great for president. Why don't you run for president?
No thanks.
So who would you like to see represent the Republicans for president, as Obama's done in a year?
It's just one of those things, and I got asked that question, believe it or not, right over at Holy Cross High School a week or so ago. And, it's not, believe this, it's not usually the person that's the front runner now, because you've got over a year before this thing actually gets really heated up. So, you're looking at people that know how to do this. I mean, obviously Governor Christie is way down there, but I mean, he's the one talking real to people. Marco Rubio's up there. Jeb Bush is up there. At some point, I think like someone, like Donald Trump's going to wear out his welcome. If you go to the other side of the aisle, you kind of look at what Hillary Clinton's going through and all that kind of stuff, and Joe Biden's just sitting in the background, just watching everybody destroy each other. He may have the ability to slide right in there and take the whole thing over.
You have such an interesting and deep career. You played in the NFL, you ran for Congress, you're an incredible father, and now you do a talk show on WIP with Angelo Cataldi and the Morning Crew. Is there something in life that you haven't done that you wish to do?
I don't know. That's part of my problem, and part of why probably I ended up running for office is I have a hard time saying no, because I love when people challenge me and put things in front of me. So that's a big part of it. People present you with an opportunity or something, and you kind of scratch your head, and that self-doubt enters your mind, and then you go, you know what? I can do anything I want to because I'm going to work harder than anybody else. So that's just kind of the mentality, and thus far it's worked out.
We're spending a few minutes with Jon Runyan, the great Eagles offensive lineman. This Eagles offensive line this year, Jon, it's been absolutely brutal. And if you can't block in this league, you will not win football games. And that's why the Birds are sitting at 1-3. This offense has been anemic. You have a lot of experience on that offensive line. What are you seeing out of this Eagles offensive line right now?
Well, obviously right now there's a lot of injuries playing into it. I don't think anybody can tell us as we sit here today, what the starting lineup's going to look like, which is a huge issue. And I think the next biggest thing is a lot of inconsistencies in actual technique and execution of the plays. It's not that they're not blocking the right people; they're not using the proper technique to get there. So I've been pushing that on a couple of the shows. Whether it's the player show the day after the game, just asking those questions. And there's not a lot of answers, and it showed its ugly face really bad in the Dallas game when you had guys, you had Dallas defenders, 6-7 yards in the backfield at the snap of the ball. And that wasn't that people weren't getting blocked, is they weren't, and back when I played, we called it position blocking. You weren't forcing your technique and forcing your hips into people. You're just trying to get in the way. And obviously it doesn't work, and people are exploiting it.
If you were a player on this Eagles team, what would you do in practice just to try to get everyone on the same page from an offensive line perspective?
Well, I think my biggest thing, and I know Chip hates it, but that was my MO, I'd be picking fights with everybody to get everybody fired up, and that's just how I roll, though.
With Jason Peters, and I appreciate the honesty because, hey, that's what made you so great. You were never afraid to back down from any challenge. But with Peters, he has that quad injury. It's not certain, like you mentioned, if he's going to play on Sunday. What do you look for at an offensive line when they're missing a starter or two early on in the game? Because the Saints don't have the best pass rush in the world, but if you don't have guys that can't block, anyone's going to get through and hit the quarterback.
Well, the biggest thing you have to look at there, and obviously it does play into, even if he was there, is lack of experience and not seeing certain packages. The Saints could come up and throw a blitz package out there that they haven't shown before, and obviously you're putting guys on the field that don't have a lot of reps in live game situations, and maybe they throw something at them that they haven't seen before, and are these young guys that don't have those reps prepared to deal with that and make a call on the fly to adjust for it? Because that is the one biggest thing, because they're going to test you to see if you've got all your homework done or not. The physical differential in the league is not that great, but it's the mental preparation that determines a lot of wins and losses.
It doesn't surprise me when a guy plays banged up in this league because it's a grown man game, especially in the battle of the trenches. And Lane Johnson is experiencing some issues right now as well on that bummed up ankle. And you played just below 200 straight games starting in the National Football League. How tough is it to play on a bad ankle, and what's some things that Lane Johnson's going to be experiencing on Sunday?
Well, I think the biggest thing, the bigger question is, does he move to left tackle? I've done that transition before. It takes about 2 weeks to get comfortable over there, because all the plays are called. You have to make that mental flip in your head because you're doing everything the opposite way. So that is the biggest thing. And talking about that type of stuff, the injury is one thing. There's a reason why the guys that have been starters play hurt, because the experience that we were just talking about a second ago actually allows you to play even faster, even though you're hurt. If you got a younger guy out there that doesn't have the experience, that he's thinking too much, he's actually going to play much slower than an injured guy. So that's kind of really what we're dealing with right now.
When do you think the Eagles will know what they'll have at offensive line on Sunday? Like right now, do you think they'll know if Peters is going to be able to go? They obviously won't share that news, but when do you think they know what realistically they will have for Sunday?
I don't think they'll know till Sunday morning. Depending, obviously they'll check in with Jason, Saturday night, and see how he's feeling. I believe it's probably one of those last minute things. They'll have a good idea of it by the time they wrap things up today. They'll know where he's at and what he's feeling, and if he's improved. I think that's the biggest key. And they're not going to tell us that, but if he's made decent improvement throughout the week, there's probably a good chance he's there, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Jon Runyan is our guest, wrapping up with him. Played in the National Football League from 96 all the way up until 2009. I was at that game on Sunday. I was in the press room after the game, and Chip Kelly kept on using the words, "We got to execute better." He must have said execution 100 times, and then he changed his tune. He did vacillate a bit on Monday when he started to blame the kicking game, and I didn't really like that quote by him. And then finally yesterday, he came on out there and said the blame is on himself, which I do believe the blame is on Chip, because he's the one that makes the decision of who gets on the field. He's both the GM and the coach. The big question, though, with Chip, because the word stubborn gets thrown around with Chip Kelly, is will he adapt and change his playbook? There's one thing to say it. Will he actually do it on Sunday, John?
Well, I think with what you just said, you kind of see him changing what's coming out of his mouth in press conferences. And, it's not comfortable. I think they're kind of in a place where they're almost at that point where they really don't know who they are, because what they're doing is not working. And I think with Chip kind of changing the way he's talking and, trying to take the accountability. I heard several guys on the team try to pull it back on themselves and talk about execution, but it's that balance of execution, but also putting the team in situations where they can actually execute when they're in a fragile state because they're not playing well. So it's a balance. I can tell you, it sounds nauseating, but it's kind of refreshing to actually hear that. They must have had the conversation as a team and really sat down and said, trying to figure out what's going on, because you can hear the speak around the clubhouse actually changing a little bit.
One thing I'll never get with Chip Kelly is just he didn't really address that offensive line in the offseason. They said goodbye to Evan Mathis, and Mathis wasn't 110% right in that situation, but he was still coming here for the mandatory camps. He was en route, and they decided to cut him. And he's not playing at all-pro level. I get that right now, but he'd still be probably the best option for the Birds. And then he just didn't draft anyone the last 2 years from an offensive line standpoint. Do you have any explanation for that? Because I just don't understand it.
Well, maybe his philosophy. I mean, the Evan Mathis thing probably came out of the general manager's sock that he's not going to deal with people trying to bully him like that. And I understand that from a business perspective. From actually getting the best players on the field makes you scratch your head a little bit. And then in drafting also, I mean, play that scenario into this one and not drafting anybody. Different coaches and different general managers put different weight on different positions on the field. I know he drafted Lane Johnson early on, but has yet to touch that. I would be very surprised this year if they don't go into free agency, if they don't go heavy in the draft on O-line.
This was a guy in Chip Kelly that, to me, he took this GM job to be better than 10-6, to have the final say, and in his mind, doing that would help them win a playoff game or two. So far, that team is not meeting those expectations, and they sit at 1-3. How would you rate this Eagles season a success, big picture, as right now they sit at 1-3? What kind of number would you have to place a win standpoint on?
Here's the problem with the season right now. They haven't played a whole game. If you string a couple of these halves together, they probably blow all these teams out. So what is causing the inconsistency? Is it play calling? Is it the players themselves not having attention to detail and executing the techniques they're being taught? They need to figure it out. Obviously, they're not out of it. I mean, the NFC East is that bad right now. They're not even close to being mathematically out of it. So it's a matter of them actually going out. I mean, how about a goal this week? Let's go out and play a complete game and see what that brings us.
Before we let you run, DeMarco Murray was a player last year that led the league in rushing yards, and he was playing behind the best offensive line in the league with the Dallas Cowboys. They just have so many big boys up front that just do a sensational job blocking. Murray comes over here, isn't getting the offensive line help, and he's not getting the touches that he thinks are the right numbers. And you heard him get a little bit frustrated after that game on Sunday with the loss in Washington by a score of 23-20. Do you at all think DeMarco Murray regrets coming to Philadelphia?
No, I don't. I just think it's a matter of, of everybody coming together. I mean, look what he had in Dallas. He had Tony Romo playing well. You have Des Bryant, who's a threat down the field. Until this past weekend, Sam Bradford hadn't thrown the ball down the field. When you start doing that kind of stuff and threatening the back end of the defense, the running the ball is going to be easy, and then you enter into that balanced scenario that every coach wants. It all becomes a lot easier, and you just need to be able to go out and, like I said a second ago, play that complete game, put people on their heels, and this whole thing changes around.
John, hopefully we see a better performance out of the Eagles on Sunday. That's Jon Runyan from WIP, former congressman and played with the Eagles for many years. We appreciate a few minutes. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Zach.
There is Jon Runyan joining us. Really great stuff out of him. And that's one of the more interesting life paths I've ever seen. You go from the NFL, where you're beating people up on the field. Then you go to Congress, where you're beating people up off the field, because that's its own political battle with people with their own driven agendas. And now he's a talk show host in one of the most entertaining talk show cities and shows in the entire history of the thing, with Cataldi and all those guys, because they're just great. I can tell you from a firsthand perspective as I interned on that show. So time in the WIP studios is 11:50, and I don't think the Eagles are going to win Sunday. They are a better football team on paper than the Saints, but I'm just so concerned with that offensive line and the pieces that they're moving around on that line because of injuries. I just don't see them being able to block, and if you can't block in this league, you're just not going to win many football games. So I say it's going to be another disaster week, another close loss for the Birds, and they drop to 1-4 on the year.